All right, there we go. That should be some audio, and hopefully everything will be fine. So that should be, and let me just confirm that is actually the right audio. Properties, microphone, yep. All right. Should be about to hear my own voice. So that should be, and let me just confirm that is actually the right audio. Properties, microphone, yep. Lovely. All right. Hello, everybody. How are we doing today? Chocotaco, are you a Calvinist? Yeah, coming in. Oh, sorry. Let me just get up the appropriate, chat. So, because it's not, this is last stream's chat. You know what? Your question's not going to appear. Oh, there it is. Okay, yes. Hello, Mr. Headliner. Hello, the Richie Claire. Happy Monday. Yes, happy Monday to you. The most, we're first day Adventists here. So, or second day Adventists. I don't know. It's a bit weird because obviously they call themselves Seventh Day Adventists because they, because in their head the Saturday is the seventh day of the week, but it's a bit weird because obviously a lot of people now would say Monday is the first day of the week. I know Taco isn't asking me, but I've been considering it. Okay, so yes, Choco Taco says, are you a Calvinist? Short answer is no. I used to be. So, for me, I guess I have 3 issues with Calvinism. One is that it is, and they're all kind of similar. Well, the first one is just that I see absolutely no reason to believe limited atonement at all. And to kind of pivot that into something which is kind of leading on to the next point, I think that if you try to... The problem with limited atonement is even if you did believe in it, you now can't really preach the gospel honestly, right? Because you would have to say... because obviously, I would say a big part of the gospel is telling someone Jesus Christ died for your sins. But if you believe in limited atonement, you have to say, Jesus Christ may or may not have died for your sins. It's kind of Schrodinger's death right now. If you believe in him, he died for your sins. But if you don't believe in him, you don't die for your sins. And that kind of leads to the second issue, which is that it's, regarding this whole free will thing. I think that there are legitimate criticisms of the concept of free will, philosophically speaking. But the thing is, that's not part of the gospel. It's not part of the Bible. It's not... I don't really see any indication that the Bible is wanting us to put this massive focus on this philosophical question of, do we have free will? What are the implications of God's sovereignty for our relationship? So essentially, you're taking the focus away from the Bible to this question, which is going to be very inaccessible to most people. Most people just don't really get a lot of the context around these free will debates. And then, obviously, at the same time, a lot of people, even if they do understand what you're saying, they're not going to like it. And that would be a very silly thing to be preaching to someone if you're preaching something they don't like, and it turns out it's not even true. And the third issue is that I think, to me, it seems like Calvinism and Reformed theology in general, it's very much a theology for people who want to make a big show of how intelligent they are. Because, I think the entire idea of it is about coming up with all of this fancy learning, this fancy theology, this all of these intricate works, and the church fathers and the early reformers and Zwingli and all that kind of stuff, to come up with this idea which really is not very well grounded in the Bible. And I have my brother-in-law, my wife, her family are Presbyterians, and my brother-in-law, obviously, I love him, love him as one loves a brother-in-law, love him as someone who I only really met through my wife, but I get along very well with him, and I wouldn't want to besmirch him, but I have to give him as an example of this thing, which is his house. There is just a wall of biblical commentary, all theology stuff. Now, I've got a load of books behind me. To be honest, at this point, mostly they're there as a way to minimize the echo. I saw someone say something, by the way, about... it's just I've noticed his institutes on your shelf. That's a very good point. Okay, yes. So I do own that, and I have actually read that. But sometimes I almost feel like I should get rid of all the theology books, because to me, that it feels like it gives strong like vanity vibes, like to have an entire wall of Christian textbooks, because that's kind of showing everyone like, oh, I'm like really smart. And I don't know, it just doesn't vibe with Christianity for me. I feel like really saying like, oh well, I have the Bible and I'm interested in understanding the Bible. I feel like that's better. But yeah, the other aspect of it is that it's not just that you're trying to make a big deal out of how smart you are, but you're trying to. It almost seems like you're trying to outsmart the gospel when you like come up with all this elaborate stuff about, like how we're saved, and like some of it's like like the thing is, even some of the stuff like they say, I'm kind of like, okay, I can kind of get what you're saying, like when it says like he died not just for our sins but also the sins of the whole world, and I was like, well, that's talking about like nations, so it's saying he didn't just die for the Jews, he died for all nations. That doesn't mean he died for every single individual. Okay, like that's a perfectly valid thing, but it's kind of like, to what end are you trying to outsmart the material in this way? Yeah, he's saying, yeah, it feels like those rabbis that have huge walls of books to legitimize their faith. Yeah, like that's the thing. I think you really want to be careful about seeming smart by like the standards of the world. And that's the other thing. I mean, the Bible, there's like so much to it. And I just say there's not really much. Like, the thing is, like, sometimes commentaries can have some value in that, like, it can be useful to hear someone else's opinion. But yeah. Get Understanding the Bible for Dummies, then you get the best of both worlds. Yeah, you kill Echo and don't look smart. Sorry, wait. I'm not gonna lie, I don't quite understand what you mean by you kill Echo. Is that like a... Oh, I see. Sorry, I understand. Sorry, the echo in my room. Sorry, yeah, I forgot I said that. Yes. That's a good point. Yeah, I'll just get a whole wall of those. No, yeah. I need to organize books behind me. No, to be fair, I think with the one thing which I wouldn't mind, and I do have like a few of these books, is history. So there's like some books I haven't put up there yet. Like that's why it's kind of like, on the bottom level, it's a bit empty. So yeah, I need to come up with a system where I like work out exactly where to put everything. Anyway, we should actually jump into the video, especially because this video will probably be bringing in a lot of atheists, because the last video we did brought in a lot of atheists, and Matt Dillahunty, big atheist guy, and therefore those atheists, insofar as they'd be willing to watch even any of this, might have now stopped because they'd be like, oh, I thought we were going to talk about atheism, but instead we're just talking about inter-Christian disagreements. So yes, whatever. We will jump in. So I know that in the past, of course, I've had more of a focus on Catholicism. I think I'm going to look at atheism for a while, but then what will probably happen is I'll get bored. That's essentially it. I respond to one thing, let's look at something else. But I have actually thought in the past that probably responding to atheist stuff is better in terms of building the channel, because the number of people who really care about the disagreements between Catholicism and Protestantism is relatively small compared to the number of people who care about atheism versus theism. Anyway, which I guess makes sense. It's a broader disagreement. Like, a Muslim could maybe watch this video and be like, oh, well, actually, see, normally the title of the video is Takedown of Christianity. So it's 40 minutes. It's unlikely we would clear this in one part, but we'll give it a shot. So yeah, I think I've watched the first 2 minutes of this, and like, he doesn't make any arguments right away. So we'll see like how many arguments he makes, but yeah, we will jump in and see how we go.
Patreon Project presents, Do They Really Believe That? Now, I was a fundamentalist Christian for more than 25 years. I got saved at the age of 5.
Blake says, do you ever plan to make full videos again for this channel, or just use it for live streaming? Very good question. Yes, so I have two plans. One, of course, you say just use it for live streaming. I'd be very surprised if you weren't aware that I'm doing YouTube shorts, but I can understand that like that's a very quick, easy thing for me to do. But yes, that is a different thing that I'm doing, which, with that said, that leads on to, I am going to, at the end of this year, because for those who don't know, I've been doing a read the Bible in a year reading plan, and basically I decided when I got to the New Testament, because like the Old Testament, there is stuff to explore in the Old Testament, but I was like, I don't know about like the density of stuff to explore. Whereas once I got into the New Testament, I was like, okay, I know that for every single day that I am like I have a passage to read, there will be something that warrants commentary for the sake of a YouTube short. So I have been doing those YouTube shorts basically every single day. I had a little bit of a fall off when I was on holiday. The good news is I was sufficiently kind of the reading plan actually gave me some leeway, where I think I had about like a week. Like it had me finishing with a week to go before the end of the year. So now it takes me right up to the end of the year. Anyway, at the end of the year, essentially, I am going to just upload a video where I compile all those shorts together. It will probably be called something like, probably like a technically inaccurate title. Like I made a YouTube short about the Bible every year. I don't know, like I'll try and cut something like catchy to essentially get at what the video is, but in a way that sort of sounds impressive so people will click it. But I'm going to do that. And once I do that, and I will probably then actually get rid of all of the videos I currently have there, because that's just a format that like I'm kind of past that format, which you can see if you go onto my videos now. So do that. And then hello Tides. I added an R there. So basically put that there, and that would be almost, I guess, in some sense, a channel trailer of sorts. But then the next thing, which I would actually like to do, is just very deep explorations of biblical ideas, kind of looking at them holistically. So like, and like I've had a few ideas. So for example, Christmas. Should Christians celebrate Christmas? And just looking at every single possibly relevant like passage on that. Like obviously looking at the stuff talking about Jesus' birth, but then also looking at, like issues like how should Christians engage with paganism. So that's kind of an idea I've had of essentially that someone can have an issue in their mind. They're like, what should Christians think about this? And then like that video would be like, this is a complete... But the problem with that is that would require... Like I would need a lot of confidence to be able to make such a video. But that is my vision, which is, so the live streams would be response videos, the YouTube shorts, and then the occasional compilations of those would be verse by verse exegesis, and then the videos would be topic by topic in-depth explorations. But yeah, like I say, of those, this is very easy to do. Like what we do, well, not necessarily, because it could be stuff brought up. Anyway, we'll try and proceed again.
On the aisle at a revival, and was active in the church throughout my teen years. And I thought that God wanted me to be a preacher. And I had parents who felt that way, and I know other members of the church did too. I wasn't forced to, I was forced to go to church on Sunday mornings because I'm not a morning person, but I was there voluntarily the rest of the time. Sunday night, Monday night visitation, Wednesday night services, Thursday night youth things. I went to summer camps. How many people have seen Jesus Camp? Mine wasn't quite that bizarre, but I did go to summer camps like Windermere, or Camp Windermere down Lake of the Ozarks. And when I was 18 and got out of high school, I was terrified because I thought God wanted me to be a preacher. I was terrified of public speaking, which is incredibly ironic now. And I bolted and went in the Navy, and I was in the Navy for 8 years, got out, ended up in Austin, Texas, where I live now, and eventually lost my job, lost everything, and said, okay, God, if you want me to be a preacher and now you're punishing me for not doing that, let's do it. And I spent more than a year and a half in study and prayer in the hopes of becoming a preacher. Now, you don't have to go to seminary to be a Baptist preacher. You don't even really have to know that much about anything. You just have to be able to convince people that God chose you to be their preacher. That's how it works.
I want to call your attention to a situation where they have...
I mean, look, I will say that I felt like, was that like an Israel advert? I don't know. Like in my head, I just I wasn't really paying attention to what the advert was, and I was like, is that like an Israel thing? Anyway, to be fair, it's also worth noting like plenty of people go to seminary and then still end up pretty unimpressive as preachers. I feel like really the qualification for being a preacher is to be somebody who's personable, somebody who's like, funnily enough, good at public speaking. It's not really, again, I think that, to be honest, you don't need your preacher to be like somebody who knows a whole load about the Bible in terms of like exegesis and stuff. Like you don't like essentially they don't have to be a biblical scholar. They just have to be someone who's like good at picking up on deeper meanings of texts and kind of feeling it out. Anyway, sorry, yeah, that's. I'm going to try to keep my asides to a minimum simply because obviously what we really want to focus on here is the arguments. We haven't had any arguments yet.
So I looked back on my life and I thought about what I believed. Now, it's often easy for me to put on my Christian hat. I've argued both sides. I will continue to probably argue both sides. I argue the non-religious side most often because I don't want to benefit the religious side. But I've run into many people who were lifelong.
Jake Green, this is the most boring stream I'd ever come across. Oh, I'm sorry. I just wish there was like I wish atheists were more entertaining to react to.
Long atheists who seem befuddled and confused. They don't really believe that stuff, do they? They can't possibly believe that. For people who weren't raised in a particular religious tradition, all of it seems outlandish and strange. It's not just the talking snake.
Well, no. Fun fact, I wasn't raised in a particular religious tradition. I was raised atheist, and I actually am now a Christian. So this idea that like every single person who was not like, for people who weren't raised religious, it just seems crazy. You know, like actually a lot of people who weren't raised religious look at it and they go, oh, yeah, this actually seems pretty credible.
It's every little aspect of it. Surely they didn't believe that. Maybe they're just paying lip service to these ideas. And when I look back at what I believed, I have to say, I don't know. How much of it did I actually believe? And how much of it was me believing in belief, as Dan Dennett would point out? That
interesting. Of course, interesting simply because as, you know, I would say that I believe in eternal security. And therefore, I do not believe that there is such a thing really as an ex-Christian. But again, it depends how you define Christian. I would say that it is possible for somebody who was a sincere believer to fall away from the faith, fall away from being religious. But the point is that they are still saved because, you know, God's never going to let them go. And we all have like varying moments of doubt and strong faith and everything in between. So I don't think it's impossible for there to be someone who like fully stops going to church and I guess stops believing, you know, like just reach the point where they just wouldn't even identify themselves as Christian, and yet they're still saved because they did sincerely believe, and therefore God's not given up on them. Obviously the thing is that's not always going to be the case, and it's interesting because, you know, with someone like Matt Dillahunty, you'd probably say, well, this guy's, it's hard to believe that he is still saved, that he's actually still going to heaven. It's not impossible, but it's hard to believe. But of course, it's interesting that, you know, if I said, based on my belief in eternal security, therefore, because he's probably not saved now, he never really believed. I'm sure a lot of people would say that I'm being, you know, bad faith by saying that. But it seems like he's perfectly willing to concede that himself, that he may well not have actually sincerely believed.
I believed there was value in saying that I believed this. I believed there was value in
Ryu N1 quote a lot. Source on that. At first glance seems true for overwhelming majority of cases. I'm not sure what that's a reference to, I'm afraid.
acting as if I believed these things.
That's actually quite funny, yeah. Even in heaven, Dillahunty would remain unconvinced. I mean, yeah, that is the issue, right? With the and like genuinely, unironically though, because when you look at what certain atheists have said, they've literally come out and said, well, you know, even if I had a direct encounter with God, I would still think that it was, you know, aliens or something messing with me. So yeah, I feel like actually maybe even if Dillahunty went to heaven, because of his atheistic epistemological blind spot, he would be sat there going, maybe I'm stuck in the Matrix. Maybe this is all just a dream, like a fever dream or something. And maybe I'm going to suddenly come to and be like, you know, and what would ever disabuse him of that notion? And that's kind of the giant epistemological issue with the atheistic worldview. It leaves you with the situation where you just can't ever actually believe that you are wrong, and that actually, like, there's just no scenario where an atheist is ever going to be like, oh, actually, yeah, maybe it is reasonable to believe in Christ. Because again, what would he say? He'd say, well, we know that the natural world exists. We know that computers exist. We know that hallucinogenic drugs exist. So therefore, compared to that, the belief in God and heaven would be an extraordinary claim. So yeah, genuinely, unironically, even in heaven, he'd be by his own standards saying, well, it's more reasonable for me to believe in the naturalistic explanation. And that's a problem when you're literally in heaven and you still don't get it.
What did I believe? And it's getting harder and harder for me to
I don't know how to say your name. Ryu, I'm just going to say. Sorry, so yeah, he's saying atheism can be unfalsifiable, so can theism. What would disprove theism for you? Yeah, it's a hard thing to say, and I do kind of understand that there's not necessarily an easy answer to why theism is more reasonable than atheism in terms of the ability to be convinced it's not true. See, the thing is, I can talk about like a type of thing, but then if you ask me, well, do I ever think that's actually going to happen? Maybe I'd be like, oh, I don't know. So a type of thing that would convince me would be if somebody could offer up evidence of the theology of the Bible being significantly different from how I think it is. So if someone were able to cast theological doubt on salvation by faith alone, or whatever, like, or the Trinity, for example. But salvation by faith alone is a good example, because so if I were to have a debate with a Catholic on the issue of the Bible and what the Bible teaches, and I was to just monstrously lose that debate by an insane amount, such that I'm just forced to admit, I'm completely wrong on the Bible because that Catholic just trounced me, then I would become an atheist.
Hell, the further I am removed from my time spent believing.
So I was like, will I ever do a Q&A stream? I think at some point I ought to, yeah. So there would be some value to that, definitely. I certainly have no reason to be like, no, I would never do that.
The answer, do they really believe this, is probably yes and probably no. And none of us...
But a God could exist and the Bible be false? No. Yeah, so I guess I would say... If Christianity was false, I think I would be like 50-50 on, like, because I think that I think there are good arguments to believe in the existence of God independent of Christianity, but I also think that there are good arguments to believe in atheism, of which I would say that the basic argument for atheism that I would say could draw me towards it would be that, one, atheism is kind of like the null hypothesis. Like, I can grant that. I can grant that if you've got a choice between a God exists or a God doesn't exist, the default would be, well, probably doesn't, right? We don't see any like obvious evidence of that. And with that said, I think an atheist could say, well, yeah, there's all these like mysteries and stuff that isn't really explained when we don't have God, like, for example, the origin of the universe. But you know what? Actually, maybe this is just maybe the beginning of the universe was just crazy, and we don't know. Now, obviously, I don't find it like, for me, the fact that atheists are like, well, God is stupid, to believe in God, that's totally irrational. Like, that doesn't really make any sense to me, because if you're like self-admittedly, like, your main argument against all the theistic arguments to say, well, maybe the universe was like crazy and weird, like, that's not, like, essentially you're positing a kind of weird exceptional circumstance for the creation or the coming into existence of the universe either way. So it seems a bit weird to act as if like that theists are really stupid for coming up with a particular explanation that they think is actually much more conceivable and therefore likely to be true. But yeah, for me, the thing is, and when if I were at that 50-50 state, I guess in some sense that would be sort of unfalsifiable in that it's not really a position one way or the other. So yeah, basically, if I did not think Christianity was true, I would probably become a pretty pure agnostic.
Despite what some of us may do on stage from time to time, can actually read minds as far as we can tell. And so it's a mistake for us to pretend as if we can read minds. To say, oh, you don't really believe that. No, there's no way. You can't possibly believe that. Or to claim that someone's belief is in fact sincere merely because they said so. So I can't tell you.
Oh, by the way, I'll give the stream a like while you're, because I was just thinking it's very nice you've got such an active chat, I was just thinking, oh no, we've really got to get through this video though. But obviously, far be it from me to look a gift horse in the mouth and begrudge an active chat. But yeah, if you're here making the effort to type, then by all means make the effort to smash that like button. Thanks.
Somebody else's mind or heart, if you want to go with the religious language. All I can do is take a look at what I believed and what people claim to believe. It's important to remember that Christianity and every other religion isn't just one thing. The Bible's not just one book, it's 66 or more books if you're Catholic that are collected together. And there's not just one idea within any of these religions. It's a collection, which means that there are probably, almost certainly, people who believe some things and not other things within any religion. I said before that if you want to find out what's wrong with the First Baptist Church, you can ask the Second Baptist Church. And if you want to find out what's wrong with Christianity, you ask the Jews. And if you want to find out what's wrong with Judaism, you can ask a Muslim, etc. Atheists haven't had to do any work. We just point around and say, yep, you're all right, that they're all wrong, that they don't have good.
Yeah, so, and this is something which I found interesting, especially when I was interested in, well, when I was as an atheist approaching studying Christianity, that was, I always thought, the most useful question to ask someone, because I think a very, and certainly I can say this now as a Christian, a very kind of stupid question to get asked. I'm sorry, it's just a stupid, or it's a very difficult question to answer, let's say, which is, why do you think Christianity is true? That doesn't really mean anything, right? Because, like, why do I think Christianity is true relative to what? Right? Because I could give a load of reasons why I think God exists. That doesn't really solve the problem, right? So the question, when I was an atheist, kind of studying religion and asking people, I spent a lot of time just like talking to people on like chat rooms and stuff, and like Reddit and whatever forums. And I would, like, a really common question I'd ask is, why is your position true compared to other people? So, and even so, like, I would ask a lot of, because I couldn't really get like Hinduism. Hinduism is very confusing to me. So one of the questions I would always ask is, like, as a Hindu, why are you a Hindu and not a Buddhist? Why are you a Hindu and not a Sikh? And heard many different answers there. And even like for Islam, like, I wasn't, I quickly became not especially impressed by Islam, but I was still interested to ask, like, why are you a Sunni as opposed to a Shia? Like, because Sunnis really hate Shias. Like, they're like, no. I was like, what is the reason for that? And it's really useful to ask someone, why do you believe this position as opposed to this really similar position? And I wish I knew more about like science, because like, if you take something like evolution, I know there are like different theories of evolution and like kind of different takes on it, where different, and it'd be really interesting to kind of ask someone, like, why do you believe this particular theory of whatever it is and not this other theory? I always find that's a really interesting question when you're asking someone like about the differences they have with a belief that's very similar to their own. But of course, the significance is that while Matt Dillahunty clearly doesn't engage in very much critical thinking and just says, he just goes around and asks the Jews what's wrong with Christianity, and asks the Muslims what's wrong with being a Jew, and asks the Hindus what's wrong with being a Buddhist, and then he just says, well, see, what they said, that's the issue. The thing you actually have to do is then think, well, are those good arguments? And of course, the way I became a Christian is that when I would ask the Christians, why are you not a Jew? Why are you not a Muslim? Why are you not a Catholic? Whatever. I would hear arguments that actually, I was like, oh, that's actually a pretty big problem that religion has right there. Like, obviously, the big ones are like people talk about like the Islamic dilemma. I think that's a pretty serious argument. And then I would ask like the Muslims, well, why are you not a Christian? And they'd be like, well, God can't be three persons. I was like, why not? Like, that's like essentially all the Muslim objections to Christianity, they're just obviously nothing like as compelling. And it almost seems to me like atheists are just pretending when they act like the disagreements between religions are a huge problem with believing any sort of religion. It's like, genuinely, you literally just need to have like a 5-minute conversation with a reasonably well-read Christian who's like had experience talking to Muslims, and ask them why they're not a Muslim, and then speak to a Muslim and ask them why they're not a Christian, and you will immediately see that one side has way more credible arguments than the other. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not particularly impressed by, like, I would say actually, it's a cool thing that Matt's acknowledging that an advantage of talking about religion is that you can hear different religious points of view disagreeing with each other. But when he then says like, oh, and therefore we can just say, well, they're all wrong because they all disagree with each other, that's obviously incredibly stupid.
Good reasons for these things.
One thing I need to do.
So Blake says, is the entire speech going to be like this? Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, we're coming up on an eighth of the way through, I guess. Well, no, we're more like a tenth of the way through right now, and we haven't had an argument yet. It'll be interesting to hear what the arguments are, because it's supposed to be a takedown.
Assuming that people believe something is a mistake, and it's especially a mistake if you're going to enter a conversation with somebody and what you assume about their beliefs is wrong. One of the biggest mistakes you can make is saddling a Protestant with Catholic beliefs. You were raised primarily around Catholics, and so this idea of an actual transubstantiation where the cracker literally, in reality turns into the body of Christ, only Catholics believe that in that sense. And so if you go to a Protestant and watch them, having their version of a Eucharist ceremony, and you think, look at them, cannibals. We didn't think that. The Southern Baptists looked at the Catholics and said that was a cult. They're the cult of Marian saints. They don't have a real religion. They've had this poisoned and polluted by the church. And this, as a Southern Baptist, I was taught this, and we don't have the same ideas. Well, if I can't just assume what you think, what should I do? Hey, I could ask you what you think. And now, while I can't get to what you actually think, I can at least address what you claim to think. So looking at the Genesis account of the universe.
The issue there is it's interesting that he's just said that, because of course that gets at an issue, right? Which is, this video is called, the takedown of Christianity. And he has just acknowledged, of course, that Christianity is very broad. Lots of Christians believe different things. So what I would now expect, based on the fact he said that, is that he's either going to address all of the points from all of the major kind of Christian perspectives, or he's going to focus entirely on Christianity as it's believed by basically everyone who claims to be a Christian. So I'll be interested to see how he kind of engages with the question in light of that complication he just acknowledged.
That can lead to a lot of different conclusions. The more literalist view, the more fundamentalist view, might lead to a young Earth interpretation, where the Earth is somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 years old. And we know that that's not the case. And so it seems bizarre, and it seems like a point that's very easy to attack. But it can also lead to...
It's interesting. I think a lot of people just do not care about science. I was listening to a Baptist preacher who I enjoy the preaching of, but I wasn't surprised to hear that he was a biblical literalist, young Earth creationist. He said, how do you know if someone's not saved? And he said, well, someone's not saved if they do not believe the Bible. And the first example he gave was, he said, imagine if you told someone, like you give someone, the gospel, and they claim to be saved, and then you tell them that Jesus was born of a virgin, and you show them the biblical text that says they're born of a virgin, and that person then refuses to believe that Jesus was born of a virgin. Well, that person's not saved because they've not believed the Bible. And then he said, and another example is if you tell someone, you get someone saved, and then you show them in Genesis that it says God created the world in 6 literal days, and therefore evolution's not true, and they don't believe that, that also tells you they're not saved. Of course, the issue there is if that person believes, the difference is, for the record, that to believe in a virgin birth, that doesn't require rejecting science. It just requires you to believe that something happened that defies science. And to say that something happened that defied that thing is not the same as rejecting that thing. But the issue with disbelieving in evolution is you're not just saying something happened that defied science, you're saying that all of our scientific observations about the natural history of the universe are wrong. For the record, we never made any natural observations about exactly what was happening in Mary's womb around 1 AD. Zero. There are no scientific observations about Mary's womb. So to say that Jesus Christ was born of a virgin birth to Mary, his mother, that is not a contradiction of science, because there is no scientific opinion on that. There is a scientific opinion that, as far as we know, generally, women do not give birth without having had sex beforehand. but there's no scientific statement, there's no scientific truth that says that always necessarily has to be the case 100% of the time, and it's absolutely impossible anything exists beyond our scientific understanding that could cause that to occasionally be not the case. So that's the thing. There's a difference between the science that should, like, there's a difference between rejecting the science, as in like the massive scientific record everyone agrees on, and assuming that science must always be accurate.
The day-age creationists, the people who think that when the Bible says a day, it didn't mean a 24-hour day, it meant some undefined time span. That God did this and it took some amount of time that we called a day. And it can lead to a mix of those because it's not clear. Is the Bible, is Genesis, is this story about our origins, is this man's attempt to describe an origin that they believe is something that comes from a God? Is it inspired by a God? Is it actually written by a God, as I heard one preacher say recently? That, no, the King James Bible, actually written by God. I don't think that is as accurate. I'm pretty sure that you've taken literal just a little too literally. Is this our best attempt to explain things? Is it a demonstration of our ignorance? There may not be a single clear or right answer to any of this, which is how we end up with over 1,000 denominations that identify as Christian, and even more once we get outside of Christianity and start looking at Judaism and Islam, and that's just the Abrahamic religions. There are as many different views about God and what God wants and what God thinks as there are people sitting in pews.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters.
Well,
I need to finish this project.
So that was
Now,
some not very well done targeted advertising.
while there may not be a single clear right answer, and you'll have all sorts of arguments about what is the correct interpretation of this passage, there are, at least within the Bible, some areas that seem to be more obviously intended to be taken at face value than others.
Yeah, so for the record, and I have presented this before, my understanding of the Bible is that the authors of the Bible used human methods, and my evidence for this is that actually I was thinking that I like the idea. So I believe I'm right that Ramadan lasts 30 days. I feel like next Ramadan I want to do a series of YouTube shorts that would be 30 messages for Muslims, because I was like, there's so many things I would just want to kind of like ask Muslims and just say, like, you know, like basically specific ways that I feel could be quite challenging for Muslims in terms of making them realize the issues with a lot of their, you know, assumptions about the world and the way they engage with religion. Anyway, I'll just present why it is that so the biblical authors use human methods, and I think the most obvious reason we should believe that is, as far as we know, almost every single biblical account was written pretty much contemporaneous with the events it's describing, as in within 100 years. And, you know, obviously, you know, that is within human capacity. A lot of the historical sources that we consider reliable in studies of antiquity are from over 100 years past the point they're describing. You know, a lot of the in fact, pretty much the main sources for the Punic Wars, for example, that historians use, were written, I believe, like 200 years after the events of the Punic Wars. So, yeah, we, generally speaking, are willing to accept that it is within the capacity of a human being to, between 100 and 200 years, still look up what's happening and say, oh, and of course, you know, according to Christianity, the Torah was written by Moses. So we would then say, well, that was written exactly as it was happening with regards to Exodus, for example, and Deuteronomy, Numbers, Leviticus. With a lot of the, as far as I know, and this is something which I feel like I should really actually look into at some point, most of the historical texts like Ezra, Esther, First Chronicles, First Kings, Second Samuel, whatever, all of that stuff, Judges. I don't even know if we actually know who it is who's supposed to have written that. But again, what we do know is obviously the Gospels were, are typically dated to within 100 years. This is even by liberal and secular scholars would date it to within 100 years of Jesus Christ's life. Yes, my point would be that it seems like most historic, and of course the other thing is that we know, for example, that Luke had a patron when he was writing his gospel account, and the point is this is all in contrast to the Quran, where in the Quran we're told that Muhammad just had exactly what he was supposed to write dictated to him by a divine source. And with this said, if the Bible was written by human authors using human means, and they needed to seek out patrons like Theophilus in the case of Luke, they needed to make sure they were reasonably close to the events, and that's why we have most of the accounts being written by people who were close to the events. Then, when it comes to things like the creation of the universe, well, Moses wrote Moses wrote the Torah, including the book of Genesis, and therefore it would make sense to me to say that he was just writing based on what he knew. So I just wanted to say that for record. If you've ever wondered, why is it that people would have these different interpretations? And why is it that I would say, for example, that you really need to believe in the resurrection, you really need to believe in the virgin birth, you really need to believe in the miracles that Moses did, right? And Moses obviously performed very many miracles. You really need to believe in the miracles that Elijah did. You need to believe in most of the Bible, the vast majority of the Bible as a historical account. You need to believe in Exodus as a historical account. But I don't say you need to believe in the very earliest chapters of Genesis as a literal historical account. The answer is very simple, because I believe that the authors of the Bible, I don't believe the Bible is a history textbook. So yes, I believe that the Bible is protected from error as it relates to theology. I don't think God would let there be a theological, doctrinal error in the Bible, but I don't believe the Bible was intended to be a history textbook. So I don't think that we should believe that the biblical authors were protected from error as it relates to history, and therefore, if they were using human means, it would have made it basically impossible for them to actually know how the universe was created. We shouldn't take them as an authority on how the universe was created.
And if you interpret...
Squeakrit Genius says, I do wonder why God will allow so much room for doubt and confusion. There's a very useful passage from this on this from Jesus, and you'll just have to, I'm pretty sure he repeats this in all three of the synoptic gospels, which is, he's asked, why does he speak in parables? And he says, well, I speak in parables so that hearing they may not hear, and seeing they shall not see, or something like that. And essentially what he's saying there is, even though they'll read it, if they're not actually willing to think through what's being said on a deeper level, they're just going to reject it. And that's fine by me. That's what you, if they're not interested in trying to understand it on a deeper level. If an atheist is just going to pick up Genesis, say, this is stupid, then obviously that's on them, right? Because I don't think that anything that I just said in that explanation of why I think it's perfectly reasonable to take Genesis as non-literal, I don't think any of that is beyond an honest actor's understanding and comprehension. So, yeah, I just feel like that's kind of on them.
The Genesis story...
Yeah, parables are clear to us, but nonsense to others, yeah.
As a story of Satan creating the world, you've got a lot of work to do to convince anybody that you're actually right. You're too far afield of what it says. While there may be...
Yeah, Blake says, about... It's kind of ridiculous when people get super upset about young Earth creationism, get mad about it. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. And, I said before, for example, that I actually do think that there is a worthwhile distinction to be made between microevolution and macroevolution. Yes, it's not a scientific term, and it's not something that scientists would recognize, but I understand what people are saying when they say, well, hold on a minute, I can believe that different kinds can turn into the same kind. So I can believe that something that is basically a dog can turn into another dog. That something that's basically a cat can turn into another type of cat. That something that's basically, a crow, or like a corvid, I believe is the expression we have for, broader types of crow, can turn into another type of crow, and so essentially you believe that speciation is a thing, but that similar things turn into similar things. But I don't believe, it doesn't make sense to me to say that all of these mutations times by a billion years turns. And I mean, it's worth noting it's not even a billion years. I think it's often just a couple of million. We get these quite massive changes. That all that happened. I think that's I think you're being totally disingenuous if you say, well, obviously you should believe that whatever. So I believe dimetrodons, which are like these lizards with big scales sticking out, they're considered to be one of our ancestors, and they were only 250 million years ago. So obviously you should believe that 250 million years ago, that the lizard body and the big sail they have on their back, they're quite a classic image of a dinosaur, if you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, even though they're not technically dinosaurs. But yeah, if you do you know what I'm saying? It's the ones that they're like lizards, but they have these giant sails on their back. I think they are. I think I'm right. They're considered to be our ancestors. I think you're being disingenuous if you say, how can you not believe that happened? They turned into us over 250 million years. I mean, look, these finches have different shaped beaks.
Room to move around in there and say, well, maybe this wasn't about God actually forming Adam out of some dirt. Maybe this is ancient man's metaphor for from the earth, God brought forth and breathed life into Adam. Some passages, thou shalt not kill, probably intended to be viewed at face value. And so you can use that as an opportunity to say, why isn't thou shalt not suffer a witch to live still viewed in the same frame as thou shalt not kill? They sound very much the same, and they both give the impression that these are instructions for what you shouldn't do. Hey, you shouldn't kill people unless they're witches. That seems kind of straightforward, and yet almost nobody is running around killing witches, at least not in the United States.
So this witch thing always, I find it very silly. So you have to understand, witches, we're talking about people who practice dark magic. So there's this story about Romans when they first showed up in actually it was the Isle of Anglesey, which is in Wales, and when they got to the beach, there were a whole load of women who were covered in tar, black tar, and they set themselves on fire in this massive human sacrifice when they showed up. That's apparently a thing that happened that the Romans witnessed, and this would have been before the Romans were Christianized. But that is a thing that we know happened. We know that many societies throughout history have engaged in human sacrifice, and obviously what a Christian would then say is that these societies were doing that as part of some genuine communion with demonic forces. They were sacrificing babies in fire so that they could have some kind of spiritual experience with demons. And if that's the case, actually, I think that it's very reasonable to say that somebody who is sacrificing babies so that they can commune with Satan should be killed. The problem with these people have is that they think, when they hear killing witches, they think that some woman, her laundry is too white, and everyone says, well, why is her laundry so white? She must be doing black magic. And then they burn her at the stake. And the problem there is, just because someone gets falsely accused of something based on ridiculous premises doesn't mean that the entire thing is nonsense. So if someone asks me, hey, Michael, do you believe that witches should be killed? I say, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. If somebody is found to have murdered a child as part of some ritualistic blood magic so they can commune with Satan, I think that person should be killed. I say, so you think that women should be burned at the stake because they read a book? Yeah, and I actually recently watched a video by I believe the YouTube channel is called Pre-Modernist, and he was talking about misconceptions people have about the Middle Ages, and one of them was this idea people were super eager to burn people at the stake for anything. It's no, that wasn't really a thing. But anyway, it's just silly. Let's see. It's about, can people do magic? Are there witches in this regard? I don't know is the answer. I think that certainly it would be a rare thing. I also think it is possible. It's possible that an unsaid aspect of when Christ gives, because obviously we know that Christ gave the apostles special powers. He gave them these powers to confront, like to exorcise demons and stuff like that. I think it's not unreasonable to think that that actually led to the complete eradication of black magic from the world, and as such black magic isn't a thing anymore. Yeah, I don't think Christians should. I mean, look, if you want to like completely throw away the idea that there is a spiritual dimension to the world and that there is like a dark aspect to that spiritual dimension, I think that you are, I don't know, I don't see any benefit to trying to argue for that, because I think it's very reasonable to say, well, actually, you know, like when you look at the way that some people behave, and I mean, this is the thing I think about, right? Like, have you seen that movie Eyes Wide Shut? And like people, like there are actual like pedophile gangs, like rich people seem to be doing, like, I think it is actually pretty, like, even if you're like an atheist, even if, like, literally I was speaking to someone who is a completely secularly minded atheist, but she was like, you know, when I look at the stories you hear about the way that the wealthy and powerful people are behaving, I do genuinely think there might be some kind of dark, evil force that the wealthiest people are in communion with, who is giving them some kind of advantage in our society. It's like, yeah, like that's the thing, like that's not even like a crazy thing to say. Again, like when you look at like Epstein and all that, and like obviously Hills Wide. Did I say Hills Wide Shut? I felt like I conflated The Hills Have Eyes with Eyes Wide Shut. So Eyes Wide Shut, that Stanley Kubrick movie. Some people say like he was killed because obviously he died like relatively shortly after that movie was released. I don't know. He seems like the kind of guy who maybe was like burning the candle at both ends. He was a little bit haggard in all the photos I've seen of him, so he was already pretty old. I don't know if we can say he was assassinated, but certainly I think it's reasonable to say that I think he's basically as good as admitted that the presentation of like a secret society that you see in Eyes Wide Shut is based on real societies he's aware of that have existed, and obviously they have this, like, you know, like everything about that movie seems pretty demonic. Anyway, sorry. So I didn't address Ryu's question, which is, how do you explain the idea of death before the fall? That seems to be a serious theological problem. I think, yeah, it's not a theological problem to be sniffed at, certainly. There is an issue there. I think that's like actually something which I would have to talk about later, because we do need to try and make some progress here, but that's definitely a worthwhile thing to talk about.
So if we have some passages that are literal or read at face value and others that are metaphoric, and everybody can just make up
Thank you, Nevrotic.
their own justification, then what do we know about what people believe? I think the only thing that demonstrates is that people believe that they can make this say whatever they want.
Nope. Wrong.
Advocates for a particular position, literal or otherwise, actually need to be made to clearly state what it is they believe and then offer the justification for it. Oh, you think there was a talking snake? That's interesting. Can you tell me why you think that's the case? Most of the time, you're going to find that the answer is because that's what the Bible says, or that's what my holy book says, or because that's what God has revealed to me. But what did I believe about Genesis? I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure, because I remember being okay with the idea of evolution, even though I probably thought God interacted in the process in some fuzzy way. I'm not even sure I had a good understanding, any more of a good understanding of evolution at that time than I did about God's potential interactions with it. But what I would take away from Genesis wasn't there was a man and a woman and God created them, and there was a talking snake and the 6 days of creation, and this all needs to be taken literally. I think, despite being a fundamentalist Southern Baptist, I probably most of the time view Genesis as, hey, what's the important message to take away from this? God created a world, we messed it up, now we're going to pay for it.
Oh.
Seconds. There's
Desert Island.
That's the important message. And the facts within Genesis don't make much difference to that message, whether it's a metaphor for our corruption or it's an actual literal description of what happened, doesn't change the takeaway. This is one of the best functions that religions have exploited.
Honestly, that guy was like, oh, this has been a pretty boring live stream. I don't really blame him. We're a quarter of the way through now, which is a significant amount. And he hasn't made a single argument. Which, like, I'm not saying, like, it's kind of fine if you want to, like, lay down a foundation. Like, they're, like, I can understand sometimes people might be like, oh, I'm going to just, you know, I want to start saying like less, because I think I do it way too much. I can understand somebody saying, I'm going to build up an argument where the first 30 minutes is just laying the foundation, and then the argument where I bring it all together comes later on. But to be honest, I hope that's not the case with this, because first of all, I don't really think this is building up any sort of argument that I can tell, but okay, let's proceed.
You need to have claims that are ambiguous enough that they can be interpreted in different ways, so that they are potentially unfalsifiable. There's no way to show that they're wrong. The more specific you get, Thor hurls lightning bolts, or Zeus does. Zeus hurls lightning bolts. The more specific you get, the more easy it becomes to show that you're probably not correct. However God did it, God did it. Now,
yeah, so I just have to address this, because so far the only argument seems to be, well, the problem with Christianity is that it's so ambiguous you can interpret it all sorts of ways, and that means it's not really falsifiable, and, you know, it doesn't really mean anything. So obviously for some people that's going to be true, but the issue is, again, kind of like he already said, there's lots of people with different opinions, and there therefore will perhaps be an opinion that is, well, there'll be lots of opinions, of course, that are people trying to twist the Bible to say what they want it to say, and then there'll be perhaps an opinion that is, oh, this is what the actual reality of the situation is. Just like with, you know, facts of the natural world, there'll be lots of people who try and twist it to say what they want to say, or like historical facts, for example, and then there'll be the actual reality of the situation. So for me, the one thing that I've been shocked by, and this is what really made me a Christian, was I thought, okay, well, I'm hearing a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, I'm seeing these people who seem to believe in salvation by faith alone. This like Protestant evangelical idea of, you know, it's God's grace, that's why we're saved, that our works, you know, and all that kind of stuff anyway. And then what shocked me is, because I was expecting to see, all right, well, you know, the Catholics believe one thing, then you get these kind of mainline people who believe something, and then you get the kind of like hardcore faith alone, easy believist, hyper grace, all that kind of stuff. And they, you know, so I was like, it probably says stuff that basically teaches all these things. It's all contradictory, and that's why everyone comes to these opinions, or different opinions. But then what I discovered is, hold on a minute, actually the faith alone stuff, that's really unambiguous. Like, whosoever believes on him shall not perish but have everlasting life. There's already any ambiguity there. And then you get to like the Catholic stuff. I just have been reading Romans 5 today, and of course, Romans 4. I apologize. Oh, stupid of me. Romans 5, of course, is, well, significant, right? We're coming up on the big one, right? Romans 5. Way. But yeah, I've been reading Romans 4, and of course Romans 4:2. For if Abraham was justified by works, he would have, cause to boast, but not before God. The Catholic, like one of the big Catholic insiders says, well, you know, the only time faith alone is mentioned is in James 2, and it says we're not justified by faith alone. The problem is, it's so like that seems like, oh, so you know, we've got different verses for different opinions, right? The faith alone people, they have John 3:16. They have, I mean, also there's I believe isn't it even like Romans 4:5 or Romans 4:4 where it says to him who does not work but believes his faith is counted righteous. You know, the faith alone people have their verses, but then the Catholics, they have verses like, you see that we are justified by our works and not by faith alone. The problem with the Catholic one is that actually the example we're given of how we're justified by works and not by faith alone, if you go to James 2, is with reference to Abraham. So then you just interpret Scripture in light of Scripture. You go back to Romans 4:2. What does it say? For if Abraham was justified by works, it was not before God. So like, okay, so we see how someone can be justified by works and not by faith alone, and we see that example in Abraham, and we're told that Abraham was justified by works, but not before God. So like that kind of like everything works together sort of perfectly in this way that's coheres with faith alone, and that was really weird to me. Like from an atheist perspective, you think that Christianity was kind of just a load of people sort of making it up as they go along, and you're like, no, hold on a minute. Like the different texts written by different people advocating for faith alone, which is nominally a position like Catholics will claim, a position that didn't even come along until 1,500 years later, and then it all comes together. It's very strange.
Was good enough for me. That was the bumper sticker. God said it, I believe it, that's good enough for me. Or, God.
Really great question. Blake, my problem with faith alone is that Paul straight up describes things people will do that keep them out of heaven. So, yes, there's a good thing here. So essentially, he says, obviously, such and such and such and such and such and such will not inherit the kingdom of God. So I have an opinion. This is a Rom 510 original away. But I think, as far as I can tell, it's scripturally justifiable, which is inherit is slightly different than just having something. Because if you think about it, if you inherit something, that kind of means like you're owed it. It means it's what you're going to get. And, oh, sorry, that was a bit of a weird noise. So the point is that we don't inherit the kingdom of God based on doing all of those things. And therefore, the reason why... Well, okay, so and then I'll just proceed. But obviously what's going to happen is when we are resurrected in the flesh... resurrected in the spirit, rather, then we will actually be cleansed of our sins, and then we will be in a position to inherit, because obviously it says that God will not remember our sins anymore, blah, blah, blah. So you can do all those things, and you won't inherit the kingdom of God, except for when you are then cleansed of your sins in the resurrection, where you will be in a position to inherit. But obviously the reason why Paul's bringing it up is he's saying that he's trying to impress the importance of not doing this stuff, because he's saying this is the kind of stuff that is the reason why you are not currently now in a position to be inheriting it. So that's my interpretation. I think that works very well. I think it especially works with the story of the sheep and the goats, where Jesus also like talks about inheriting. And again, he's kind of cool for people to inherit, as he's saying, because of all the good things you've done. So I think that works.
Did it, that's good enough for me. But my view of Genesis was probably muddled, and it definitely changed over time. And I clearly never had a good reason to believe, and yet I was always convinced with each new version of the Genesis story in my head that I did have a good reason to believe. Well, what other beliefs from my past seem strange? Talking snakes? That's not good enough. Let's have talking donkeys. That's in there. Jonah and the great fish. Don't call it a whale. They'll correct you. So just get used to saying great fish right off the bat. It says great fish, not a whale. And then when you...
It could have been a whale, of course, because the modern taxonomical distinction between whales and fish is nonsense. I mean, well, it didn't exist then. And of course, nowadays, people are pointing out that actually there's no such thing as a fish. And I know that Hank Green, who's not a Christian, but Hank Green made a video recently where he essentially said that we've actually kind of come full circle. And at this point, it's not really inaccurate to say that a whale's a fish, because fish has so little scientific meaning, because different, like tuna is like so radically different from like an anglerfish and all that kind of stuff. Like they're really very unrelated, that at that point we might as well just say that a fish is like anything that lives in the sea. Like there's almost like nothing wrong with that. Like we could say like seals are fish, whales are fish, whatever. But yeah, anyway, sorry, that's like a minor point I just want to say. And by the way, so there are like some really interesting things. I don't want this to become about Catholicism, because we've really got to make some progress, but okay, well, I'm going to try and make some progress, and then maybe I'll look at the comments. But I'm just like, it's always that thing of like, the chat is really interesting, but then we've got to, actually. And the video isn't that interesting, unfortunately.
You point out that you knew that it was a great fish, and that it wasn't a whale, that it was just a great fish.
Oh, sorry, I just want to say, all of this is basically just I mean, it really is just kind of circular reasoning, right? He's saying, well, obviously Christianity is stupid. I mean, they believe in talking donkeys and someone surviving in the whale of a fish. But of course, actually, all of that would be trivially easy if there is a God who exists. So essentially, he's saying, well, obviously Christianity is nonsense because it's Christianity. Like, because they posit the existence of a God who is capable of doing all of this stuff. But that's not an argument against... You can't argue against a position by saying, well, obviously your position is stupid because your position entails the stuff within your position, and then not make an argument beyond that. Like, if you can show why it would be the case that necessarily donkeys can't talk, like there's no universe where a donkey can talk, then that would be an argument. But just saying, well, donkeys can't talk right now in our natural world where we understand everything is governed by natural laws, therefore this supernatural vision of the world is necessarily invalid. That's not an argument.
Ask them, what difference does it make if it was a whale or a great fish? We're talking about a man who lived inside of one for a while. If you're going to nitpick over whether or not I call it a whale, by the way, whale would seem more reasonable. I mean,
I heard someone say, I don't remember the context of this at all, this is just like an idea I'm throwing out there. I heard someone say that there's like a good scriptural reason to think that Jonah actually died when he was swallowed by the fish, and he was resurrected. So it doesn't really matter. Again, obviously, it would be like there's no reason it would be impossible. Like, I'm not saying like, because obviously to resurrect someone from the dead isn't any more difficult, I would imagine, than, or any easier, I suppose, than keeping them alive in the fish for such a period of time. But I just heard someone say, I can't remember the context of what their argument was, and it might have just been speculation, but that, you know, instead of it being that Jonah was kept alive in the belly of the fish for 3 days, he was dead but then resurrected. I'm not sure.
there's got to be room to move around in there, hopefully. What about the plagues? Does any of that make sense? Rivers of blood, let's kill the firstborn.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense if there is a God.
Locusts, are these, real things that happened? We know that the Exodus almost certainly didn't happen. The archaeological evidence demonstrates that there's nothing to support the idea that Jews were held captive, certainly not in the numbers that the Bible supports. By the way, if you lined everybody up who was supposedly escaping Egypt and had them hand to hand, they would stretch from where they were supposedly imprisoned all the way to where they ended up, which makes you wonder why they had to wander around for 40 years when they could have just formed a line and passed everything down.
Okay, so I guess 3 things there. First of all, with the credit, that this is the first good point, because obviously, kind of like I said earlier on, there is no scientific evidence that Mary didn't have a virgin birth, right? Because science doesn't know what was going on in the wombs of a random person 2,000 years ago. But to be fair, not really science, but science in terms of the broader study of the natural world is able to actually look at, engage in archaeology and establish whether or not certain things happened, and also kind of say, well, if something major happened, like something that is geopolitically significant, then there is a likelihood that would provide evidence, and we see some kind of proof of that. Sorry, I'll just say this was not one of the 3 things I was going to say, but it's worth noting scientists for a period of time, archaeologists, thought that the Hittites didn't exist. They're like, oh, the Bible mentions these people called Hittites, but we've not found any evidence of the Hittites, so therefore that's just the Bible being wrong. And then, of course, we in fact did find lots of evidence of the Hittites when we look further. But you might say, okay, well, sure, but bad example, because that was in the early days of archaeology. This was, I think, in the 19th century, and we've obviously done a lot more digging up since then, and there's been plenty of incentive for someone to find some evidence for the Exodus, and yet there hasn't been any. Isn't this a problem? So my 3 points I want to make, I'll get the third one out of the way first, which is, of course, it's a bit weird when people make jokes about the 40 days of wandering in the desert. 40 years, sorry, excuse me. Because, I assume people must be aware that it wasn't a mistake. The reason they were made to wander 40 years in the desert because they rebelled against God. So, yeah, again, it wasn't that they got confused, whatever. So, but I just want to say, one, I think this is a good point. The issue is it's very contingent on taking the numbers in the book of Exodus seriously. And the numbers in the book of Exodus are quite insane, right? Because the numbers in the book of Exodus say that there were 600,000 men, aside from women and children, who left in Exodus. Now, considering these would have been like kind of nomadic group, and generally speaking, nomadic groups have a pretty high concentration of warriors, we're talking about an army that is many hundred. I mean, you have to talk about how many. So it's not including women and children, right? So essentially, it's adult men, and then like obviously adult men who are elderly. Realistically, we're talking about an army size, hundreds of thousands, maybe 400,000, maybe just 200,000. Either way, a massive army, right? Like that's huge. That's like huge. Like you think about like most battles of antiquity, they did not have 200,000. Never mind 400,000 people showing up. So, I think I remember hearing at one point that during the height of the Roman Empire, their entire army was 400,000. Now, to be fair, that might be like, well, that's a lot. Or rather, you might be like, well, that's not as much as you might think. Well, to be fair, during the height of the Roman Empire, they actually weren't engaging in many active conquests, right? Because obviously they had already reached their height. So it's possible that wasn't the most soldiers they ever had. But yeah, okay, well, I guess that probably makes sense. Like 400,000, you maybe have 100,000 in Africa, 100,000 in Asia, 100,000 in one European frontier, 100,000 in the other. Like at the end, that kind of, there's a logic there. But whatever. The point is that the number of people we're talking in Exodus is insane. And it's one of those things where you're like, okay, this is strange, but then it almost proves too much. Because if we're talking about such a massive number, even the authors must have known how insane that number was, right? Just logically. Because, like, if this was like a mistake, for example, like we talk about the fact that the Bible gets the exact value of pi incorrect. It offers up, dimensions of this perfectly round thing, and the extension of those dimensions would be that pi is 3. Well, in that context, we can say, okay, that was just an error, because the people writing it didn't know that 3, like they didn't know what the actual value of pi was. Okay, whatever, fine. But it's hard to believe that this was a mistake, this figure, for the number of soldiers leaving Egypt, because anyone throughout history would have been aware of how massive of a number several 100,000 fighting men would be. Like how huge, like the idea of 2 million, people often extrapolate 2 million from the fact we're told there's 600,000 men and then women and children. I guess I don't know where people get the number 2 million from, but that's usually the number I hear when people say like, oh, based on what we know about like population. So whatever, let's just focus on the number we do know, which is 600,000 men plus women and children leaving one country, going down. Like that's a huge number. And it wouldn't have been lost on people at the time that this was a huge number. The other issue is that the later parts, like all of the rest of the story, does not give the impression of a group of people who have this size. Right, there's so many stories about Israel like fainting away. So many stories where Israel's victories are presented as being miraculous, and even several moments where God is explicitly saying, "I'm going to give Israel the victory, so that people will see that my hand is with them and I'm there going to bat for them." None of this would make sense if they have this insanely large army, like an army that's like larger than even Genghis Khan's Mongolian Empire. I mean, goodness me, let me look that up actually. I'm just gonna check because I'm like genuinely interested. How many men (brackets) besides women and children were part of army at the start of his considered part. I'm just saying, I haven't got some clarification because obviously it could just tell me like, okay, so yeah, all right. So this is saying at the start of Genghis Khan's conquest, he commanded roughly 80,000 to 100,000 Mongol men. So I don't know. It depends where you draw a line. Because you could say, well, you know, like some of the like we should include some of the other nomadic groups who join later on, whatever. But to me, that's significant, right? Like the start of Genghis Khan's conquest, one of the biggest conquests of all time, 80 to 100,000 men. So we have a lot of reason to be thinking it doesn't even make sense that the Bible would mean for us to interpret these numbers literally. And so this is where it gets to the big point. There is a strong argument to be made that the what is translated as 1,000 in the Bible actually means group. So if it has a statistic that says like, there were 50,236 men, that sounds like a lot. But what it actually means is 50 groups of 236 men. Or something like that, basically. So the word 1,000 and the word group are very similar. And I think that probably makes the most sense as an explanation. So it's just a mistranslation. The word group and the word 1,000 are very similar. And yeah, because that just, again, it makes sense logically. Because I just don't believe, like I say, it proves too much. Because you don't even need, like, you wouldn't even need to go into the desert to prove that 2 million people didn't all leave Egypt in one massive go. I think like people have even said, like, based on our calculations for the Egyptian population at the time, that would be like half their population. Half the population of Egypt leaving. This is... It's much more... Like, the big problem of Exodus, as far as I'm concerned, is the numbers. The numbers are what make it unbelievable, even absent the archaeology. With that said, people say, there's no archaeological evidence for the Exodus. It's complicated, right? Because there actually is a lot of interesting evidence for stuff related to the Exodus. Like, in the 13th dynasty of Egypt, there's they talk about this group of people who show up who are shepherds, and they live in a specific part of Egypt, and they're kind of like this outgroup that is sort of absorbed into Egypt, and that would, and like in terms of the timeline as well, it very much lines up. There is some evidence of a particular pharaoh. I think it's one of the Ramesses, who is often presented as the typical date, and he had a bizarre, inexplicable defeat at one point, and people say, well, maybe that has something to do with the Exodus. But yeah, basically, I would say the Exodus is... Sorry, I spent way too long on that, and I actually, I do apologize. But as the upshot, I just wanted to make a point of stressing that the Exodus is, in some sense, the biggest issue for a historical belief in, or a belief in the historicity of the Bible. But in another sense, it's actually almost so much of an issue that it's reasonable to say, well, this can't be what they actually meant, right? They can't have actually meant we're talking this number of people. And that's why I find the arguments about how we're probably slightly misinterpreting it to be quite persuasive.
Instead of walking many abreast, did a sea actually part and they walked on dry land? Do you believe that? I don't know.
Why doesn't every home in the UK have brand new solar panels? The number one reason is not because...
Something like that. I believe something like that. What about Noah? Was the whole earth flooded, or was it just a local flood? Well, it depends on which Christian you talk to. There are plenty who say, no, it's not a global flood, it's just a local flood. Well, if that's the case, please explain the rest of your theology, because your book's purpose before the flood was to purge the entire world of the sinful and save this family of 8, to be God's new representatives. A drunk who cursed one of his sons to be the offspring of his sons to be slaves of his other sons. A drunk guy was the best person God could find to build a boat, put all the animals on it, and save humanity. The world must...
So yeah, for the record, and I wish I could, again, this is another thing I wish I could remember. I heard a recent argument that I thought was quite credible, that was saying that Noah and the ark, many of the people who would have been killed in the flood were saved. And I wish I could remember exactly what the evidence was provided for this, because I did find it quite persuasive. But then, of course, the flip side is, actually, some of the people on the ark were not saved. Particularly, there is a strong argument that Ham, I hope I'm right, that Ham's the one I'm talking about, who, of course, seems to have, like, there is a reading of this that you could say we're talking has a homosexual, incestuous, drunken encounter with his own father. That's the kind of, I never like to say there's like a specific kind of sin that proves someone isn't saved, but obviously if you look at like Romans 1, that's the kind of sin that makes you think this is something that like someone who's really got a pretty serious like problem would be doing. So maybe wasn't saved. Essentially, yeah, it's just to say that the idea that while, yes, the ark is a picture of salvation, you shouldn't abuse typology and assume that, therefore, everyone on the ark was saved and everyone not on the ark was not saved.
It's been pretty crappy. I mean, I don't want to fault Noah for his substance addiction, but I mean, by and large, if that's the absolute best you can do, and he
Oh, and of course, the other thing being ignored here is that, God, there's this idea that God had his chosen people who he was going to favor, not necessarily because they were the most righteous, but because he chose them. And that's to do with like God's sovereign will.
He supposedly successfully built this boat. It all makes sense. Well, the Bible doesn't say it was kinds. It was kinds of animals. So maybe there was like one canine kind that, spawned all of the dogs since then? So what you believe is you say evolution's wrong, but you're okay with really, really fast evolution. Like we only needed a handful of animals on the boat. Well, if God can do the other stuff, then he can magic the animals. And that's the key. Once you begin with the idea that there is a God who can do anything, it's laughably easy to then accept that there's a talking snake, that we got a bunch of animals on a boat, that we flooded the entire earth, even though that doesn't seem possible.
No, so the thing is, it's easy to accept the idea that individual personal supernatural miracles happened because you've got no argument against that. Now, you would have a perfectly good argument if you were to point to things like the Exodus. And also, pointing to the idea of a worldwide flood. Well, we don't have very much historical evidence of that. There's a difference between saying that you think supernatural things can happen because you believe in a supernatural God, and saying that you believe supernatural things extend to completely contradicting all of the available natural historic record, and historical record, because that's obviously a very different thing, and that would be making your claims unfalsifiable. And that's why I would never extend to that. I would never say, well, like even in the case of the Exodus, well, I'm like, there are historical issues of it. My defense of that is not saying, well, God, because he's supernatural and magic, he just made it so that he got rid of all the evidence, because that's silly.
A few generations after this global flood, there's a whole bunch of people who are building a tower.
Rio says there's a human case against belief in stuff like this. Well, the problem is the human case is the case that creates the whole epistemological issue, right? Because he basically says, well, because we know that the natural world exists, whereas we have no evidence of miracles or anything like that, we should always default to a naturalistic explanation. But the problem with that is there's always going to be a naturalistic explanation. Like any miracle, you could just say, it was like mass hysteria or whatever.
You have a civilization that has managed to go from 8 people to enough people to build a city.
Gutlibe says, if God uses power/magic in our world, it then makes it hard to predict the future with science or logic. Yes, exactly, and that's why God does that so rarely. And I don't believe he has done that since the time of the apostles. So that's because God is naturally a God of order and logic, and that's why the scientific laws are as much like a God thing as the circumvention of that through the supernatural. And he only does the supernatural stuff to correspond to moments where he really wants to show his power. But I believe that now we have the Bible. That's kind of the thing that we should be looking towards for why we have confidence in God, rather than some like miracle we should be expecting to see.
Who feel the need to build a tower so that they're never parted.
I'm guessing everyone's audio is a bit dodgy. I think this is to do with the microphone on his end.
And they focus all their energy on that. By the way, I've spoken before about how that's a great story of how God hates humanists. Because if you actually read what the text says, it doesn't say that they were being punished for their vanity or their attempt to build a tower to heaven. It said, hey, let's build this tower so that we can communicate and so that we can be one community. And God basically looked down and said, no, we can't have that. If we allow you to be one community, there is nothing you won't be able to achieve. So let's mess up your languages and send you scattering to the winds. God hates cooperation, which is pretty telling.
No, so yeah, again, it doesn't really make any sense because like he's ignoring all the stuff in the Bible that talks about like the need for people to be unified. Again, considering the fact that we know that there have been societies that practice human sacrifice and all that kind of stuff, it's quite reasonable to think the reason why God had a problem with what they were doing is because this was an evil society. And an evil society coming together, like the thing is, actually division can be good if like it's kind of the idea of how like there is an argument for smaller communities being better for morality than one large community, because in smaller communities you only need like 10 righteous people and they can make a big difference. But in a large community you're going to have like many millions of righteous people. So basically that's why actually division can be much more empowering for the individual, because you just have your small local area, and that's much harder to deal with when you're just thinking on like a global scale. And even today, I mean, I really do want to commit myself to trying to evangelize to the people on my neighborhood. And I don't mean like, just knocking on doors saying, hey, but like anytime there's like a church event saying, hey, like trying to invite someone. And for me, like I'm very much about trying to, in my social circles, talk to people about Jesus Christ, try to make it clear to people the value of my faith for me, and obviously introducing people to a church environment. And it's, there are also other people who make a big deal about, I'm going to go and evangelize in like halfway across the world. And sometimes I wonder how helpful that is. Because if you just think in terms of your local community, you can make a difference. You can make a difference in your local church. But when you're thinking, on a global scale, what am I going to do? Well, the problem is probably not that much, right? Because you're just one person. So yeah, actually, I think God was right to say that it's a problem that you have this entire society where everyone was working together. They're all one monolith. The individual was totally lost. Yeah.
That sounds like a really good idea to me. Hey, let's get together as one community. Let's unite. There's nothing we can't.
Let's see. Gutlieb says, I always wondered if God has a sense of humor. What's your view? I think so. There was a recent thing where a Catholic said like, Jesus like wouldn't have like had a sense of humor. Jesus would have never laughed. I don't know like whether that's true. I think like the argument is like the humor is based on a degree of logic, and because God is logical, he wouldn't be able to understand the like complexities of or not complex, but basically like the fact that like a lot of humor is based on twisting our understanding of logic, and this idea of like God wouldn't be able to really engage with a twisting of logic. I don't know. My instinct is to say that we're made in his image, and I don't think humor's like a bad thing. So I would imagine that the good things that correspond to how we're made in his image probably are reflected in him in some way. That would be my take. But obviously, I don't think there's like much you can say in the way of Bible stuff. I think that's an example of getting into that deeper theology where you're kind of departing from the Bible.
Accomplish, and God says, yep, you're right, there's nothing you can accomplish, so let's put an end to that. Did I believe that God came down and wrestled people? I don't know.
You're around this, right? People.
Did I think that you could change the genetic structure of sheep depending on what sticks they were looking at when they were mating, or what you happened to brush them with, so that you could end up with striped sheep? This is one of the things that basically convinced my wife at a very young age that Christianity couldn't possibly be true, because she loved genetics and she loves Punnett squares. She's a microbiologist now, and when she read that passage, she was like, that's bullshit.
It's kind of funny. I think we'll end here because it's around that time I typically end, and we'll have to pick this up on Saturday because, well, whatever. Unfortunately, we haven't really had much in the way of an argument yet. There's not really been there's not been an argument. And insofar as there has been an argument, I'll address it now, which is it's kind of funny that this started off with Matt being like, oh, do Christians really? I mean, that's the big question, right? Do Christians really believe this? But I'm kind of sat here wondering, like, do these atheists really believe this? Do these atheists really believe that the fact that this story about a man who is miraculously blessed by God contains something happening that isn't in line perfectly with genetics means it can't be true? Like, it's just, it's so weird, because it's so incomprehensible to me that someone would have such a circular worldview, such a begging the question worldview, where they're like, I'm going to read this Bible, and like, what are they like even pretending they're taking it in good faith? But it's a book about God, about someone who created the universe, who has power over the universe. But as soon as I get to something that isn't completely in line with natural science, I'm going to say, well, this proves it can't be true. It just doesn't make any sense. It would be like, how is it any different from a creationist saying, I'm going to read this evolution textbook, but as soon as I arrive upon something that isn't in line with Genesis, I'm going to say that the fact it's not in line with Genesis proves it's not true. I just don't really understand its logic. When you're reading something, or when you're trying to understand a worldview, you're sort of having to work on the assumption that worldview is true, and then see if you can find any internal contradictions in that worldview, right? Or any ways that worldview clearly contradicts known reality. Problem is, there is no reality that says that it's absolutely impossible for there to be miracles, right? Like, until scientists have documented every single atom of the universe and every single quantum state at any point in history, and said, yeah, we've looked at every single moment and we've established that at no point does any miracle happen to any of them, and we've looked into the future, we've established no miracle ever will happen, then you can say that a miracle contradicts science. But until then, or maybe, let's keep it simple. Yeah, if some scientist has a record of every single sheep that's ever existed, every single one of them, and they can confirm, yeah, we have this, we've shown that none of these sheep developed a particular way, grew particular patterns on their coats because of something that could be attributed to a miracle. Then science has disproven it. That's the thing. There's a difference between saying like that science has observed general things and things that we can take for granted given the continued natural state of the universe, or the world, and science being able to prove that this is never going to be contradicted. It's just two different things. Anyway, we'll pick this up next. Again, I keep wanting to say next week. Pick this up on Saturday, next stream, because I do want to see if an actual argument's going to be given, because so far this is, it literally is just circular. It's essentially, and it's kind of funny we've paused on such a like smug face, and like. And by the way, if we're going to talk about genetics, I don't know. Look, Matt Dillahunty's wife. It's hard to believe that we're really talking about someone. Sorry, wife. It's hard to believe we're really talking about someone who's particularly obsessed with genetics, because there's a certain, if you know, you know. That's all I'll say there. All right. I hope you enjoy. See you all later. Bye.